is passport GitHub 2. There was a GitHub 1. It's been modified and updated to GitHub 2. So let's install passport GitHub 2. We now need to go to our GitHub and we need to create a client ID and client secret on GitHub. And we need to add those credentials into our application. So go to your Git page. And if you click on your account and settings, you get this screen. And what we want is an OAuth application. So you can actually see that, when we added Azure and Heroku, they got added here. That's under already authorized applications. You probably have Azure and or Heroku there. But now we want a developer application. Click on developer applications. We're going to register a new application. So you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to set the URL as localhost:3000. You can put in a description, an optional description if you want. And for the callback URL, here's what we're going to put it in as. So after GitHub authenticates a user, we want it to come back to our auth root /GitHub/callback. And we will write a get handler for that. Now this may or may not work because obviously our passport authentication isn't quite, our passport configuration isn't quite right. But we'll see. And then just click register the application. So there's our URL, localhost:3000 /auth /GitHub/callback. So then click register. And GitHub will generate a client ID and client secret for us. We did this previously with Google when we used reCAPTCHA in PHP. We got a client ID or a secret key and a private key. Sorry, a public key and a private key. So I'll click register. And now up at the top, we get a client ID and client secret. We want to take these values. So take your client ID value and copy it. And we're going to add it to our configuration file. So copy that client ID. I'm going to open up my config db.js file. So we already have a public variable called URL. I'm going to create 3 more. We'll have a GitHub client ID. Paste it in here. Then paste in your client secret. And our callback URL, which is this. Oops, sorry, those should not be a semicolon, it should be a comma. So we've basically now got 4 configuration variables instead of the 1 we had previously. We could hard code these things right into auth.js, but generally these kinds of values, if they might change as global configuration values, better to put them in a separate configuration file. Late night. So now we're going to need to go to our auth.js and configure our GitHub authentication. So I'll go to auth.js. We'll require the Passport GitHub package, Passport GitHub 2. Now we'll use Passport in here to serialize the user, because remember, they're not logging in through our register form anymore. They're logging in through GitHub. So if they log in through GitHub, we then need to take those credentials and store that user in the session. So we've got to serialize the user function. So that represents the user that we'll get back from our call to GitHub. Add it to our session. If we have a serialize, we're going to have a deserialize. So in this case, we try to read the user out of the session. We either get an error or we get a user object back, one or the other. So when we're using Passport local, these calls were actually made in app.js. We've made calls to serialize and deserialize here using our account model. This time, we're giving the option to do that when we authenticate through GitHub. So now we want to tell Passport just a second. Sorry. So now we want to use GitHub and we need to set up the following values. Client ID, which they spell this way. Oops. One other thing we need to do is we need to link to our DB file. We haven't done that. We'll link our configuration file there. And now it recognizes those values. So there's our GitHub client ID, our client secret from there as well. Now we could hard code the values right in here, but again, it's probably a good idea to keep those in a separate file. So here we're going to chain a bunch of functions together. So first, tell Passport to use those credentials that are in our configuration file. Now we need to set up what actually happens when someone tries to log in through GitHub. GitHub will give us back an access token, the ability to refresh. So we're chaining functions together. First, use this. We get the user's name, the username from GitHub. And our Git profiles have a property called display name. So we're taking our GitHub display name and setting a local variable equal to display name. Now, in case something changes on GitHub, we'll get this display name and the profile name of our GitHub profile. I think we can leave the rest out for now. We'll try. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave this line out. I don't think we need this command.
Profile ID is supposed to have 3 Ps there?
No, but I commented out. I think this is just that if we're allowing the user to update their profile on our site, which we're not going to do. We're just using it to log in. I don't think we need to worry about updates, so I'm going to take that out. So now we want to add a button, a link on our login page that lets someone log in with GitHub. So let's go to our login EJS. After the register button, I've put a Git login button on Blackboard for you. So if you go into lesson 9, let's download that image into our lesson 9 application. Where should it go? Yep. So let's just save this one as GitHub PNG. So save it into public and images. So now we want this button to display on our login form. I think I have to start my application up again. It stopped it to do the npm install. So maybe beside my login button, let's add our login with GitHub. Or I can put it underneath. Let's just first see if my image shows up, then we'll have to make it a link. And then we'll need a root handler for what should happen when the user clicks that link. Okay, so there's our login with GitHub, which right now doesn't do anything. So we want this, we want to wrap an anchor, to wrap this inside of an anchor tag. So we want this to go to auth/GitHub. We'll close the anchor after. So now our button's appearing inside of a link. So then we're going to need to write a get handler for this URL, right? This link we'll call auth GitHub. We'll need a get command that will invoke the GitHub login. So right now, I'll get 404 because there's no get handler. Okay, so just place the image on and wrap it in a link. So we'll want to go to auth.js and add a router.get at /GitHub. And we'll use that to use the package, which will then invoke the GitHub login screen. We'll use router.get. So at auth/GitHub, here's what we want to do. We want to call passport.authenticate, but we don't want to call local. We want to call authenticate with GitHub instead. We have to pass it one parameter, which is called scope. This is what that GitHub package wants us to pass. So if we click on our GitHub link, there is one more thing we need to do. I think I have one too many brackets here. Yes, I do. We also need to make passport public. So down at the bottom, we had module exports equals router. We need to add on comma passport. We want that public as well. We can try this now and we'll see if we get a GitHub login prompt. We may not, because we may still be stuck with the same passport issues as we had on our own login, but we'll try. Oh, whoops. This bracket goes over there. So these are same parameters to passport.authenticate. So I'd close the bracket after GitHub, it gets closed over here. Doesn't matter if we write this on one line or two. Okay, we'll try again. Okay, so now the first time we do this, we're going to get prompted by GitHub, hey, is it okay that this website accesses your application? Once we say authorize, it'll get added to the list and we won't get prompted for this again. So we'll say authorize. And notice what happened. It then tries to send our callback to the URL we supplied when we created the application. We got a 404 because we haven't done any root handlers for this URL. So now we need to set up the root handling on our callback URL. So GitHub's trying. So it's actually working so far with what we've coded. This is the result we want. So now we need to get the GitHub callback. We'll write one more get handler, which is at GitHub/callback. Again, we're going to call passport authenticate with GitHub. We'll set up a failure redirect. Which will be login. And then we'll have a callback function with request and response. If the login is successful, we'll try to take them to articles. So I'm going to try to authenticate with GitHub and see if I can get to my articles page. So I'm going to restart. So right now I'm logged out. I can't get to articles, right? We've locked that page. We'll see what happens if I go through GitHub. I think I broke something. It is the same problem. It's calling passport.authenticate again. So it was working until we had, at least partly working until we put this in. So this call just isn't working properly. So I think fixing the problem with our local login will also fix the problem with our GitHub login. It's the same issue in terms of how Passport is configured. We shouldn't need to do anything else for GitHub. We've basically gone through the steps we need: create the application, generate the ID, secret, callback URL, add them to our site configuration. We want to install our GitHub package, serialize and deserialize the user, add our configuration values. Let's see if there's anything else we missed. I don't think so. Okay, so it would be the same, basically the same cause of the issue that's causing this to spin. Failed to fetch user profile. Interesting, it actually gave me finally an error. Maybe we do need to try one more thing here. Fine. We'll see if this makes a difference. Don't try it yet on yours. All right, well, that wasn't quite as successful as I would have liked it to have been.